Hello and welcome back. Today we'll be doing our June bullet journal spread. For this month I was inspired by a kdrama that I watched. It's called When Life Gives You Tangerines. And if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend that you do. It is such an amazing show, and I swear I cried in every single episode. It just touched my soul, and it made me call and bother my mum every single day. If you have seen it though, let me know in the comments if you relate and if you also cried just as much as me. I'm using acrylic paint for my cover page and a lot of the other pages in the spread. I actually haven't painted in a very long time, so I experimented quite a lot, and you can see I didn't like a lot of the ways that I did my grass, so I do change it up heaps of times until I was happy. Now I'm just drawing a person. I'd like to think it's me lying on the grass and looking up at the sky underneath a tangerine tree. And the main goal that I had of this page is for it to look peaceful, relaxed before all of the hardships that may have come or will come. I painted some branches in the corner for the tangerine trees and the little bit of shade that one would normally lie under. I then painted a darker green just to make it look like the shadows of the trees and the leaves. I also used the same green just to make the shadows of the clouds that are floating up in the sky. I wasn't quite happy with how the clouds looked. I thought they became kind of like bushes, I'm not sure. So I did go off camera and I painted and painted, which you can see here, and it did turn out a lot darker than I was expecting. And so I got so frustrated and I thought I'll just leave it. I'll come back to this and make it in a different way that I want. So I painted the borders instead. I wanted this to look like a flip book, where each page has like a tab or a shorter section with like a color on top. I don't know how to describe this, but trust the process, you'll see the vision in the end. For my borders, I did use black, green, and yellow, and I didn't end up calculating how much I wanted to cut off correctly, so I did cut off more than I wanted, but that's okay. I took an extra piece of paper and I colored that in, and I end up gluing it in, so it does fix the problem. Moving back on to the grass, which was my main cause of stress and concern. I wanted to add a bit more texture, some more grass-like features. So I added like splotches of this darker green and brown color. I did draw some birds earlier off camera, hoping to like it, but I didn't. So you can see me covering that up. And already I like this so much better than what I had before. Before this, I honestly wanted to give up. I wasn't happy at all and I was gonna scrap this whole idea. But don't give up. If you're ever in a situation like me, don't give up. Try everything you can. If you have a possibility of another idea, a potential solution, just try it. Give it a go and you might like it. It might work out well. Now that I'm happy with the grass, the next issue was the clouds, or like the cloud shadows. First thing I gotta do is cover those up. They're too dark and they don't look like any of my tree shadows. One bad thing about working with paint is that once you make the perfect shade, or you make a shade, then you don't make enough, so you've run out, and then when you try and remake that shade, you can never make the same one again. But I guess it works out well because I am painting grass, and grass has all these different textures and colors, so no real issues, but still. Next, I'm adding some flowers, particularly some yellow and white ones. I don't actually have a real technique for this. I just did a lot of dabbing. I also randomly added some pink flowers, but I didn't end up liking them so much, so I didn't focus on that color. Once everything dried, I decided to do those cloud shadows again. I did research and looked at pictures, And I noticed clouds, they don't look very symmetrical. Their borders aren't very straight and they're kind of almost messy-like. So I painted them with those kinds of thoughts in mind, and they turned out so much better, and I'm so much more happier with how they look. We're essentially almost done with the cover page. Just adding the final touches, which is that yellow border that I mentioned earlier. And no quote page this time. Instead, I just ended up writing June, but then I thought about it and I decided to add more. So I wrote When June Gives You Tangerines, a play on the title of the K-drama. Here is a final look of that, and it turned out so much better. I'm much happier with it. Next, moving on to my monthly calendar spread. I did do a similar thing to the cover page, which is painting this whole thing green. I wanted to fill this whole page with flowers, so I ended up doing this kind of technique where I splatter the paint with my thumb, if that makes sense. But I didn't like the way that it turned out. So I did it my usual way, which is just brushing the paint across. I then cut this piece of paper into rectangles. It was about 3 by 4 centimeters. And I added this little circle on each one in either yellow or pink, and I'll be writing the days of the month here. So yeah, you can kind of see the vision come to life. So I wanted this grassy, flowery field and these white calendar boxes on top. I also thought it kind of looked a little bit awkward, my boxes, so I outlined each one with a dark green. And I hope it ties everything together. I then glued every single one down individually. I just had a show on, and I did all of this whilst watching it. Once I glued all of these down, I realized there wasn't that many flowers. It did look a bit bland, a bit boring, and not very When Life Gives You Tangerines inspired. So after writing the days of the week and the days of the month, I did reflect on how I could improve this, and I just added more flowers. I didn't really like the cursive, so I covered that up and I redo it. And I tidied up the borders and added the green and yellow stripes. In the show, you do see the 2 main characters, which are played by IU and Park Bogum, walking around fields of yellow flowers. I'm not too sure what the name of the yellow flowers are, but it was very iconic and so beautiful. So that's why I wanted a lot of the yellow flowers in my bullet journal. And yeah, this is it for the monthly calendar spread. Much more happier with how this turned out. And moving on to the next. Now I'm painting an actual scene from the drama, which are the 2 main characters walking through that yellow flowered field. I kind of divided this painting into thirds. So the first third is the ocean. I used blue, and the remaining 2 thirds a greenish yellow color for the field. I did do a little outline of the couple, which I left blank in the middle, and that's because I didn't want a green undertone when I ended up painting them in later. Next, I'm just adding some texture and some depth to the grass in the field. And to do this, I just added a darker shade of green, and I just randomly added splotches around with it. I kept doing that with even darker shades of green and then blending it out so it doesn't have any harsh lines. I don't really have a pattern, I just did this on each corner. Next, I used my darkest shade of green and I added the bushes and the field in the distance. The main couple, they lived their whole childhood through the countryside in, I think it's Jeju. So you see a lot of open fields, a lot of bushes and farms and trees throughout the show. Now I'm painting some yellow flowers with the same shade of yellow I used on the previous pages to paint a field of yellow flowers. I try to make the distance look like small little dots, and then the closer you get, the actual flowers, they get bigger and they're shaped better. I also added in some white paint as well, just to have some contrast and add a little bit more color. This did take me a little bit of time, and once you do one layer, you do have to wait for this to dry before moving on to another. So you can kind of see I do a layer of like yellow splotches, and then another layer of white, and then another final layer of yellow. And whilst I'm waiting for this layer to dry, I decided to paint the main characters. I did an orange tracksuit set for the main guy because that's his school uniform, that's what he usually wears. And for this scene, it was so beautiful. I don't want to spoil it for you, so if you haven't seen it, look away, turn off your computer. But the main characters end up holding hands, and he puts her hand in his jumper pocket to keep it warm, and it's so cute. I did a dark blue for her school uniform and added in some white details. And of course, you can't forget the rocks in the ocean, which is where the mum goes and she swims and dives for abalone. I kind of used the same technique I did with the trees and the bushes in the background, but with brown paint instead of green. And now onto the last step. We're almost finished, and that's just adding the final touches, which is the flowers. I wanted the main two characters to blend in better with the grass, so I just surrounded them with more white and yellow flowers, kind of blended in that background a bit more. And there we go, all finished with this one. It turned out really nice and I'm happy with this. Moving on to the next page, which is my mood tracker. The first thing that I'm doing is adding that green line on the side of the page after cutting off a few centimeters. In the show, the main character, she does have a cabbage farm, and there is a very big storyline relating to cabbages and this farm, and it does build a lot of different storylines further on in the show, so I did want to have that with my bullet journal. So my mood tracker is going to be a cabbage farm, and each cabbage represents one day of the month. I used two different shades of green, a light one and this darker one. It does look a bit more olivey, more of the darker side, but still green. I didn't like how the background was white. Maybe it would look good when I color in the cabbages, but I'm impatient for that. I want to wait, so I decided to do these little squiggly lines in a brown brush pen that I have. I'm hoping it'll look like the cabbages are in dirt and they're growing out of the soil, but I ended up not liking it, so I thought maybe if I color it in a pencil, it'll look better. I moved on to the next page, which is my habit tracker, just to dwell and let everything else sink in. Since I left this space underneath my painting for the habit tracker specifically, I wanted to keep it quite minimalistic, simple and monochromatic, so I did choose the iconic classic yellow. And you can see here, this is where I realized I've made a mistake. I did way too many circles for the days of the month, and this is me trying to fix that. Once I finished the habit tracker, I did think about my mood tracker a little bit more, and I decided to paint the background or the soil in a brown. I do think it still looks a little bit awkward, but that's because the cabbages, they take a majority of the space and they're still not colored, they're white. But I did make my moods into 5 different shades of green, so hopefully once the day goes on and I track my mood, it'll look better. Moving on to my final page for this spread, which is my junk journal, brain dump, whatever kind of pages. I did keep it quite simple, just doing an orange and green border and drawing some tangerines and leaves in each corner. And yeah, that's it for June's bullet journal spread. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!